Hello and welcome to 52 Miniatures. Recently I made a video featuring a Warhammer Space Marine dimensionally displaced in Middle-earth hunting hobbits. The fantastic online Warhammer community had something to say about this. A grave mistake had been made. Surprisingly, it was not the dimensionally displaced issue. It was the power of the weapon issue. A mere hole in the hobbit's chest was not satisfactory. Apparently, a bolt gun not only being .75 caliber, also the bolts explode on impact, and thus there wouldn't have been much left of said hobbit, or even bag end for that matter. Now I have a reputation in the wargaming community that, must be upheld, and the power of the bolt gun must be rectified. And so I thought of a children's story. Little pig, let me come in. No, not by the hairs of my chinny chin chin. Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in. Now what would that look like in a miniature sci-fi diorama? I'm going to paint a space wolf, sort of. Seems kinda fitting. I'll explain what that is, and the setting and choice of colors in a bit, but first, let's start with some technique. This Warhammer Horus Heresy Space Marine, might explain that in a bit too, is primed black and then airbrushed with a blue-grey. If I would have had a blue-grey primer, I would have used just that. I also paint the one pauldron a sort of muted, medieval-looking red. A great thing would have been to have not glued that pauldron in place prior to painting. That's all I'm saying on the matter. On top of the base color, I'm going to revisit a technique of smoothly brushing on oil paints in brighter and brighter layers. I've experimented with this previously on a Space Marine. I enjoyed the result, but there was also room for improvement. Oil paints stay wet for a very long time. Using this to my advantage, I can blend on layers, sort of like using a dry brush mentality, only the brush is actually moist with paint. A large, soft brush creates smooth blends and a smooth surface rather efficiently, using brighter and brighter paints and working them on as if I was dry brushing with a light hand. Gives a nice depth with shadows and highlights. First off, to wet the canvas, so to speak, to give the oil paint something to blend with, I start with covering the miniature with a very diluted indigo oil paint. This is diluted almost 10:1 with odorless white spirit, creating a wash rather than an opaque paint. I then start working on layer after layer of oil paints, trying to work my way up to a pale icy blue with some deeper, desaturated blue shadows. The oil paints used were first squeezed out on a piece of cardboard and left there for about 10 minutes to soak up some of the excess oil in the paint. This will reduce dry times slightly. I've then diluted the oil paint with odorless white spirit to a consistency that would match a regular acrylic miniature paint. I didn't have the exact shades right out of a tube. Instead, I mixed mainly Prussian blue with some turquoise and black and white. I desperately try to not clean the brush with white spirit while using this technique. The brush will then act like an eraser instead of a paintbrush. Instead, I wipe the brush clean on a piece of tissue and then move on to the next paint. Why am I doing this oil paint thing? Well, I'm still trying to grasp the potential, but I feel that it's very efficient. We're talking 10 to 15 minutes of painting time to get a great, smooth, yet not too smooth, painted surface with some depth and life to it. Working with oils is also very stress-free compared to acrylics because of the drying times. I feel like I have to find the perfect brush for this technique, but wetting the surface with a wash prior to adding the oil paints, something I haven't tried before, made blending even easier. I'm now going to leave this miniature in a warm and friendly place in front of a little fan to dry overnight. And in the meantime, we can watch a sword fight and ultimately listen to great things from the sponsor of this video.
Yield to your lord.
You're no lord.
Um, I finally found it. The sword in the stone. Now I'm a lord!
No, you're not. And rise a knight.
Knight, am I not a lord?
No?
Here you go, Oscar.
Am I a lord now?
Yes, you are.
Established Titles is a fun way to preserve the natural woodlands of Scotland. It's a project based on a historic Scottish custom where a landowner is referred to as a laird, a lord, or a lady. And so by buying something as little as a square foot of dedicated land entitles you to be called a lord or a lady. And that's what a title pack from Established Titles will give you, a square foot of land on the Edelston estate in Scotland. Your certificate, like this one, which is Oscar's, gives you a specific plot number that you can actually visit your square foot of land if you so wish. Now this makes a lovely gift. I actually gave one to my son. I don't think he might appreciate being called a lord right now. He's 7. Well, he might, but a fun thing when he gets a bit older. And you're actually entitled to, if you check into a hotel, then you can choose Mr. or Mrs. or you're now entitled, if you get one of these, to be called a lord, which is pretty cool. Established Titles work with global charities, and for every order, a tree is planted to help with reforestation across the globe. The first 200 people that purchase a title pack using my link will actually end up next to Oscar, it could be good or bad depending on his mood. Please do go check out the links in the description. And if you bump into Oscar up there on the moors of Scotland, just, make sure you bring your own sword. Thanks to Established Titles for sponsoring this video. Head over to establishedtitles.com/52miniatures and check out their Black Friday sale. Also, using 52 miniatures as a code will give you additional 10% discount. And now back to the painting. Now that the oil paint is dry, I'm going to paint with acrylic paint right on top of it. No varnish or anything like that. I mean, just look at that great looking armor. I feel there's an almost porcelain feel to that dry matte oil paint. From here on, there's quite a lot of evident painting, so let's talk about the color scheme. If you're new to the world of Warhammer and indeed new to Space Marines, please allow me, admittedly a novice in the matter, to try and explain. Space Marines are genetically and surgically altered superhumans, super soldiers, originally created by the Emperor of Mankind and Games Workshop. The Emperor, a very powerful fellow quite intent on creating an intergalactic dictatorship. Thus, Space Marines have this as their day job, Galactic Dictatorship Enforcers, says the business card. The Marines are divided into legions, and every legion has a favorite color scheme. I guess this means it's easier to sell merch back home. Kids running around with their favorite legion's colors on a t-shirt means the Marines eat better. Or something, I don't even know if they eat, honestly. My conundrum, and once more doing things wrong, probably, rather like the bolt gun issue, is that the Space Marine I'm painting is indeed from the past. At least if you live 40,000 years into the future. Yeah. This is where things start to get complicated. My lovely beaky-headed Marine is indeed from 30,000 years into the future, and not 40,000 years. Those 10,000 years have done quite a few things to the official color schemes. The 40k Space Wolf Icy Grey is instead more of a metallic grey with gold trimmings. The 40k Yellow Pauldron is instead a medieval-style red emblem, rhyming well with the rest of the Norse-inspired lore. So I fused the two. I was dead set on that icy grey, yet the red I liked even better than the yellow option. The freehand wolf actually turned out alright. I think my first attempt at painting something that just doesn't resemble the crooked straight line. Rather pleased. The last layers of paint on the marine are more oil paints, this time some washes, again diluting the oil paint almost 10-to-1 with odorless white spirit. I'm not washing the entire miniature, just trying to add wash to the very deep recesses and panel lines in the armor. A layer of acrylic varnish beforehand would have been the safe way to go to make sure all the white spirit I'm now adding doesn't mess up the original layers of oil paint. It would also make the oil wash flow better, but I'm looking at ways to simplify the use of oil paints, reduce the steps, and so I just made sure to be delicate with my application of wash. Finally, I use some brown oil paint to tint the legs a little, giving them a slight dirty look to go with all the scratches and chips in the armor. And now for the diorama. These little Space Marine dioramas I'm making are built on a similar sized base, a pretty small base. As it turns out, these constraints are rather liberating and surprisingly good for the story. The small size makes me have to think simple. For instance, we're at Pig number 3's house. Straw buildings and stick buildings proved to be no match for the wolf. Now, in this final installment, he is faced by a brick house. Only concrete seemed more dystopian sci-fi. The pig, obviously a mutant. What's he doing in there? What's in a mutant pig's house 30,000 years into the future? A lab, obviously, with vats, growing new pig brothers. A heresy that must be wiped out. I didn't mention this earlier. Not only does the Emperor yearn for a galactic empire, he's got a habit of eradicating most things that are not to his liking and, human. All sorts of things are instantly labeled heresy and then just destroyed on sight. Pigs in a vat wouldn't stand a chance. This was all going through my head when I planned the diorama. I even printed out some lovely vats and pigs' limbs and all sorts, but in the end there was just no room for any of it. A good thing. Instead, I had to go back to the heart of the story, the power of the bolt gun. A space marine that, to the hairy-chinned mutant pig's great surprise, just blasts this massive hole in its wall. Not at all according to plan. The Marines are supposed to go up on the roof, fall down the chimney right into the pot and become this evening's supper. Please, by the way, if you can, in the comments, enlighten me to the moral of that story. I just can't fathom it. Anyway, the simple focus of this diorama is on a dividing wall, outside and inside, and the blasting of a hole. Cork sheets work well as broken bits of concrete. It just seems to fit the scale nicely, and the bits of cork translate well as chunks of concrete. When building little dioramas like this, I try to plan the build in stages of drying time. My first sitting was doing everything on the build that would require a long drying time, like texture paste and milliput curing. Working an evening with the first step meant that the next morning everything was good to go again. I tried to create this sense of a blast. Concrete flying through the air, vent pipes falling loose from the wall, crashing down. Fun and surprisingly difficult. In the end, I think the visual lack of a lot of dust means it's difficult to sell the idea of an explosion. But I wasn't just going to stick a wad of cotton in there covering all the details. Instead, we'll just have to imagine the dust cloud. The pipes used are from a 3D printable basing bit Kickstarter I backed. The electric wiring is from Anvil Industries' Digital Forge, and the pig is a free download sculpt from my Thingiverse. All printed on my frozen Sonic Mini 8K. Link to all the bits I've used are in the video description. Apart from the piece of 3D printed fence I used on the outside, I've got no idea where that mesh came from. Now, I'd like to talk a little more about my dear little space wolf. I've got to admit, I find the thin line between this is a game, it's all good fun, and the commonplace use of acts of horror and glorification of violence in Warhammer lore, an at times difficult line to tread. I know, I sound like the parents of old saying computer games are tools of the devil. And let's not get started on rock music. And I mean war games. It's a game about war. But does Grimdark really have to be genocide and war crimes so often? Us and them. Punishment. Cleansing. Common words in Warhammer lore. Let's take a read out of the Horus Heresy Age of Darkness rulebook. I'll be skipping around at will. The origins of the 6th Legion, that's the Wolfies, were held in utmost secrecy by the Emperor. Legion recruits were drawn not from Terra's nation states, but selected on an individual basis from the most barbaric, regressive and hyper-violent of cultures. Those who held no collective identity and could be molded into weapons without prior imprint. Skipping ahead. Over time, the Legion developed particular expertise conducting rapid operations and punitive actions against rebellion. However, its members quickly earned a grim reputation as butchers amongst those they fought alongside, and were often accused of indiscriminating slaughter and collateral damage, or even, on occasion, killing allies. The Wolves then apparently got slightly leashed by their leader, a so-called Primarch. Skipping ahead. Russ, that's the boss, the Primarch, was a field general of surpassing skill and enacted scores of successful compliances. However, many of the Space Wolf campaigns were unavoidably grinding horrors and terrible wars of genocidal cleansing. The Legion choosing to focus its brutality against rebels who they cursed as oathbreakers and punished with excessive savagery. I think the pig is about to die, don't you? I'm not really sure what I'm trying to say here, more than that the language and choice of stories for some reason surprise me. It's probably not worse than actual historical accounts of Roman legions' actions. And I'm not saying we should all just play nicer games with flowers in them, thus becoming nicer people. Well, I mean, we could try 1 year flowers, 1 year genocide, see what works best. I think what I'm after here is somewhere deep down inside. It's not the killing and the war thing. I just find stories of genocide a strange way to sell toys. Personally, I much prefer the red makes it go faster sales approach. Okay, that was a little unexpected. That's what happens when the mind wanders and the fingers keep typing script. Painting the diorama was with the intent of getting two different senses of light. The outdoors versus the gloomy inside of a mutant pig laboratory. I tried to create this sense of light first with the zenithal prime, a white spray over a black primer, spraying a more general white light on the Space Marine side and trying to mainly get the white light on the pig side to look like it's coming through the hole in the wall. I then tinted that zenithal prime using instant colors from Scale Color through the airbrush. These paints are sort of like contrast style paints, only don't really do the contrast thing that well. They do work well as transparent style paints to tint things with, like a glaze or something. In general, I tried to keep the marine side warm and the pig side cool and slightly green. Laboratories are always a little green, right? The pig is just going to be standing on the side, slightly bewildered, surprised at the power of the bolt gun, perhaps, or maybe preparing to strike back. Who knows what traps lay in stall for the hyper-violent Space Marine? Will the wolf kill again, or just become the pig's dinner? What do you think? I'm kind of cheering on the pig. It's got a menacing yet cute thing going. A big thank you to the sculptor of the pig. Definitely check out the link in the description. This and a ton more, years of work by the looks of it, was uploaded by a gent called Adrian, creator of Pocket Tactics. Thank you for the pig, Adrian. I love it. Again, tying everything together and very much darkening down the pig side of things, I finished off with oil washes and oil paint stains. There's something about how this stuff flows out that, in combination with more precise previous acrylic brush strokes, creates a nice final picture. I also added a final dusting of concrete dust using pigment powder, and then the scene is complete. Again, regarding the planning, this last oil wash was the last step of the day, so the next morning everything was dry and I could gently dust the diorama with a matte varnish. I don't know what it is, these beaky Space Marines. I very much enjoy them. The elegant simplicity of the sculpt is very inviting as a blank canvas to paint. I enjoy my take on a Space Wolf, the Red Pauldron in particular, and the whole diorama has been a joy. Now, please don't take my ponderings on Warhammer lore too much like a glove slap. I'm of the mind that it's interesting to approach all sides of the hobby and have a civil talk about whatever is on our minds. And we can leave the rough ways to our toy soldiers. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. There's a playlist on more Space Marine dioramas if you are interested. Also, please, if you want to support the continued creation of videos such as this one, consider joining the 52 Miniatures Patreon. Bye.